Amicus analysis. Amicus analysis. Amicus analysis. Amicus analysis.
Hello and welcome to Hammerheads Season 2, the Amicus Analysis, or Miles and Marcus's Amicus Analysis, or Hamicus Heads. We haven't quite decided what we're going to call this, but maybe it's just Hammerheads Season 2. And this is my very good friend, Miles Watts.
Thank you, my very good friend, Marcus Wilson. It's really nice because a friend of mine, Pete, hi Pete, said tonight he just discovered Hammerheads, and I said, well, we've just started recording Season 2, so you've got a bit of catching up to do. We were deciding for a while, actually, what we're going to do, because in the first season, we ended up doing 18 Hammer films, which is based on the BFI's recommendation of a film per year of Hammer's output. And very early on, we were going, we'll probably do Amicus for Series 2. We'll probably do Amicus, but we might do something else. And it just made sense for us to come back to Amicus.
It makes total sense to come back to Amicus, because people get Hammer and Amicus Studios mixed up all the time.
They do. It's partly because of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, I think. But they are very, very adjacent. But, as we'll discuss, the first one we'll discuss today is very different already from Hammer horror films. So instantly there's a different flavour with Amicus, which I love.
Yes, and it's not quite Amicus, and it's not quite a Hammer, because it's an entirely different production company, but we'll come to that in a minute. But yes. We should also say that Miles has got another new podcast about film, so explain about that, Miles.
Well, that one is sort of a general film podcast. Salute, general film podcast. And it was me and my friend Katie Cowan, who runs Creative Boom, who's an excellent lady. And she and I got talking over the last few years about various things, creativity in general and films. We realized we both have a love of films. So I sort of said last year, do you think should we do something? Should we work on something together? She's like, well, maybe. Yeah, I'm a bit busy. But yeah, let's. And then she came back to me and she said, yeah, I think we should. My husband said, but we should. She said, what are you doing? Do a podcast with Miles about films. And it just turned very naturally into this thing. And it's quite different from our podcast because it's called The Films That Ruined Us. And it's films that very, very personal to us.
Would you be covering any horror?
Yeah, there is some horror coming up, actually. I think it's Season 2. We finish filming. We finish recording Season 1 tomorrow, actually, as it happens. And this is the first of this Season 2. So then we're going to have a little break, but we're going to come back with Season 2. And there are a few horror films in there. So it is films that have upset and disturbed us, but it's also films that have obsessed us. Like, I know you and I went to see E.T. when we were 8 years old, didn't we?
Yes,
I imagine we'll definitely be covering that because that's stayed with us. It's a film that's just, we've cried and so much over the years at it and thought about it and stuff. So yeah, but we were number 13 in the UK Film Apple Podcasts top charts the other day. We've gone down again, but that's the way it goes. I think it's because it was new, and so. But it's what's lovely is, like this podcast and like our other podcast that we do, Tintin Cast, which you can discover on YouTube. Our audience are just so nice, aren't they? And for all these things, because we speak about the films that we love and the books we love with real passion, and like genuinely, it's quite esoteric. Really, we're just talking about things we love.
We're in that kind of strange crossover point in the Venn diagram of Tintin and Hammer horror, and I don't know if anyone else is there with us. So if you do listen to both podcasts, let us know. We'd be very interested to hear from you.
Yeah, and like with Hammerheads, we've covered 18 Hammer films. With Tintin Cast, we've covered all the books so far, but we've moved on to all the Tintin adjacent stuff. So there are some books that toy with the idea of Tintin related stuff. We just read the first Tintin novel, that kind of thing. So it's very interesting. So yeah, we were toying with the idea about turning this as changing the name, but for one thing, we paid our friend Terry for the logo. So we didn't want to do another one and just confuse people. So we thought, you know what? We'll just get better microphones and do a Season 2 and just call it Hammerheads Season 2 Amicus.
Amicus Analysis.
Amicus Analysis.
Yes.
Hashtag Amicus Analysis.
Anyway, onto the business at hand. So we are starting this season with a film that predates Amicus by a couple of years, and this is
Yeah.
1960s City
Yeah.
of the Dead,
Yeah.
which was, and the reason that many people consider this the first Amicus film is that the two protagonists who went on to form Amicus, Max Rosenberg and Milton Subotsky,
Yeah.
this is their first time working together in horror in the UK. And they're really come together in the UK because they're both Americans. And they come together in the UK because of something called the Edie levy, which was a tax that was applied to box office receipts in the UK from the 50s, which actually then fed back into the film industry, into the British Film Production Fund. So Max and Milton found this fund and found that it was just more financially viable for them to make films in the UK. So they came over and started making them. So actually, both the cast and crew of this film are sort of taken from both American and British filmmakers and cast and crew, aren't they?
Yes, which is why they, which is kind of why they are all forced to have American accents in it, including Christopher Lee, which is very off-putting for the first few minutes. It's like, what? Why is he speaking an American
He does his
accent?
remarkable job, I think.
He does. Yeah.
He does look a bit like James Stewart's evil twin brother.
I thought so. Yeah, I thought he looked like James Stewart. That's amazing. Yeah. But yeah, Christopher Lee's always good in everything. He's very commanding, and so he's at the beginning, he's at the end, and you just sort of know he's up to no good as soon as you get into the story.
I mean, it's quite a low budget film, and they do seem to, and this is something that Amicus will go on to do, in that they will get big names, but they will become known for their portmanteau films, like which have 4 or 5 short stories within the film. And that allows them to retain kind of bigger name stars for a shorter period of time. It's cheaper for them, but then those names can go on the posters and they can sell the film under that. And it feels more like a cameo for, I was going to say James Stewart.
Now hold on there 1 minute. You can't just go sacrificing innocent people here.
It feels like a cameo for Christopher Lee, really, in this, because he's not in it for a great deal of time.
No, but they use him very well, don't they?
do.
Like, because, if you think about some of the Hammer films we covered in the first season, Christopher Lee originally, he gets to play Frankenstein's monster, and so he's sometimes heavily disguised in the first few until they let him play Dracula. But in this, he's just himself, and he's going to crop up later, and I sort of guessed how he was going to crop up later as well. I might have seen this movie before ages ago. I don't know, because you were going to start with Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, which is the first actual Amicus production.
Horror production.
I said, oh, well, I'm going to watch City of the Dead. And the reason I knew that is because of my friend Andy Stanton. Hi, Andy, and previous guest of the show. Hello. He is something of an expert about Amicus and Hammer movies. And he said, oh, make sure you start with City of the Dead because it is kind of officially the first Amicus movie because of the producer and the writer. Yeah, so that's why it was stuck in my mind. Because otherwise, I might have looked at it and gone, or I might have gone, well, it's not an Amicus production, so let's start with Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. But I'm so glad we started with this one for many reasons.
Well, I mean, we should put it into context, seeing as we did Hammer last season. I think the first Hammer film we looked at was 1957, and that was the Curse of Frankenstein, was it?
It was indeed.
So this is 3 years after that, and obviously Christopher Lee is quite a big box office name, and Hammer is riding high at this stage. And Hammer are notable at this stage for having the kind of quite schlocky, high colour, almost artificial looking blood colours and things like that, early colour movies. And this isn't. This is very stylish, shot in black and white, actually by the cinematographer Desmond Dickinson, who I think was towards the end of his career. But it looks spectacular. But I think as we're watching it, 60 years later, it looks spectacular. But at the time, actually, it might have seemed quite old hat to the people going to the cinema because they were sort of expecting colour, they were expecting kind of gore and
Mm.
very raucous red blood on the screen. So
Yeah.
this was probably quite. I mean, Hammer would have seemed a bit more advanced than this at the time. I would have thought.
Yeah, I guess so. This is more like a Night of the Living Dead. In
Yeah,
fact, it reminded me a lot of Night of the Living Dead.
yeah. And I think that's
And I
also
think,
because of, I mean, Hammer would always kind of go for that Gothic period stuff, whereas
yeah,
obviously this film starts during the witch trials in New England in the 1600s, but actually a lot of the
yeah,
film is set in modern day. And
yes, a lot of them are, aren't
Amicus
they?
go on, yeah, Amicus go on to do a lot more modern day horror stuff. It's a
Yeah,
lot more contemporary, the stuff that they do, which for
yeah.
me makes it even more chilling because it's something that feels like it could happen.
Well, we're getting into folk horror, aren't we, or whatever you want to call it? It's kind of like superstition horror, folk horror, witches and cursed objects and stuff. It's less monsters and demons, and it's more, yeah, the things that are happening. I mean, in this film, literally under your feet, or adjacent to, and the creepy stuff that's happening in the
Yeah.
woods that you don't know about, rather than, necessarily monsters of the night kind of thing.
I mean, it's not a million miles from The Wicker Man in terms of its kind of small
Yes.
town sacrifice. Christopher Lee, obviously, straddling both
Yeah.
films.
With his
Straddling
mighty
both
legs.
films.
How did you first hear about Amicus, by the way? Because I think the first Amicus movie I saw was taped off the telly, The Beast Must Die, which is one of the
Yeah.
last ones. Well, probably a few months' time we'll be covering that one. But I was aware that that was an Amicus film, and then I might have seen one or two, but the League of Gentlemen very much alerted me to Amicus because people kept saying, "Oh, it's very The Wicker Man, it's very Amicus," and I was like, "Oh, okay." And especially the Christmas special of League of Gentlemen, they're saying this could be an Amicus movie because it's got those three stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's when I started showing a real interest in Amicus, which sort of early noughties, late 90s. But how about you?
I we talked about this on the last season that my grandma would let me stay up very late, inappropriate and watch inappropriate films when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I
Awesome.
I remember at her house seeing, I think it was like a BBC Two late night movie, and it would have been From Beyond the Grave, which is Peter Cushing, is the
Yes.
kind of, I guess, the guy who holds the portmanteau piece together. He is the
Yeah.
antiques dealer in this particular movie, and that
Is that
was really,
Grimsdyke?
oh,
Is
could be,
that his
yeah,
name? Peter
yeah.
Grimsdyke, I think. Yeah.
That could be it. But
Yes.
he's just terrifying, and all of
Yeah.
the pieces in that film are just completely terrifying, particularly for a 9-year-old. So
Oh my God, yeah. But you
yeah,
can't stay away, can you? I remember that. And yeah, Beast Must Die, American Werewolf in London,
they're
all
all
these
quite,
movies that were
kind of have
sinister.
a slightly weird. They all have, whether it's like a black exploitation kind of
Yeah,
horror,
I know what you mean.
or the kind of
Mm,
the antique shop. But there's always some kind of gizmo in it, isn't there? It's like a
yeah.
yeah,
And they're very British as well because it's a British look, it's a British sort of output, and they have lots of British actors in, but it's got that kind of everything's fine on the surface. But then the people acting very creepily, it's like, yeah, something is not right here.
well, it's not British like Hammer is British. I mean, Hammer is almost kind of carry on British in a way, whereas
Yes, it is. It
this.
is. Yes.
This obviously the main two. I mean, Rosenberg and Sabotsky, both Americans who are coming here.
Yes.
They don't know Britain incredibly well, so they're sort of feeling this stuff out for themselves. I mean, for a, I mean, if I hadn't read that this was Shepperton Studios, I would have just assumed that this was filmed in the States.
Yeah, there are moments, aren't there, where you think, especially because like this is 1960. There's one hilarious moment where a young man is driving towards the house, and there's fog everywhere, but the music is so incongruous. It's like,
Jazz.
it's the
Well,
60s. Da, 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 da.
Rosenberg and Sabotsky would do, I think, quite a lot of films about kind of young people's music back in the sort of 50s and 60s. So it was all about kind of
Yes.
the new jazz that was coming through, and it was seen as a bit
Yes.
edgy, and like the parents wouldn't like their teenage sons and daughters going off and seeing films about this kind of new jazz craze. And
Yeah.
it's all that kind of background music in this, which makes it, again, quite unique as a horror movie, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't overdo it, doesn't ham it up and have
And in a way
every
that it
time
has that kind of teenage feel, because Christopher Lee is obviously a lecturer at a university, and it follows the Nan, who is his student, and her fiance, and you know, it's about the kids. It's like that kind of precursor to the teenage kind of like horror sleepover movie or whatever. You know, it's like
It's his actually, and that's one of the things I wanted to say before we get into the plot, which is very pared down and very, very simple and very cool, I think. But it feels like a real sort of missing link in a lot of films around that time. So it is a bit Night of the Living Dead. It is a bit slasher. It is a bit it is sort of came at the same year as Psycho. It has got that sort of so it does that's why I was so impressed with City of the Dead. It's got this place in film history as this very, very, and it must be quite seminal because it reminded me of a lot of films that have come since. And generally, it seems to be regarded very highly, City of the Dead. It gets talked about with, you know, oh, this is a really solid movie, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned Psycho, and one of its big similarities to Psycho, which came out in the same year, of course, is that the main female lead protagonist gets bumped off in the middle of the film.
Yeah.
Just like in Psycho.
Disappears, yeah.
So in a way, you've got you don't really have a lead character that makes it through the entire film. You've got Christopher Lee kind of dipping in and out is this kind of cameo, and then you've got the Nan character who gets killed and then gets kind of taken out. Her role gets taken on by, I think it's Patricia is the character who is the bookstore owner.
Yeah.
In
Pat.
Pat.
If you're going to have a heroine in a horror film, don't call her Pat, because then you have to have the hero going, Pat, where's Pat? Pat,
Ricky.
Pat. But arguably, I would say, you know, the main character in this is Elizabeth Selwyn / Mrs. Newless.
Yes, because again, this is playing two characters, or one character that is a witch that comes back to haunt and curse the village.
Sold her soul to live, to just sacrifice other poor ladies. And that actress, Patricia Jessel, I think is phenomenal in it, actually.
She's great. She's really
been burned at the beginning, which they're all shouting. It was like something out of the Holy Grail, wasn't it? She's a witch, burn her. I just wanted Terry Jones to pipe up. How do you know she's a witch?
Well,
turn me into a newt.
The whole first sequence where the witch gets burnt at the stake, essentially, with all the villagers cheering it on. That was cut for the American version of the film, which came out under the title Horror Hotel.
Horror Hotel.
Which is a pretty awful name, really. But
in '61. Neither of the titles are really that bang on when it comes to this film. They
don't really kind of suggest quite what the film's about.
No.
But in the American version, they cut out that entire first sequence, I believe, with the witch burning, which kind of maybe you could have, and the stuff about the you do see the witch being burned, Satan. And the curses, the cursing, and Satan and all that gets cut out. So I don't quite know how you cut all of that out and then have the rest of the film make that much sense.
No, because half the point is when you meet her later on, you're like, I know who she is.
Not least because her name backwards is Newless is Selwyn backwards as well.
That's it.
So whenever you watch
I always do that in films.
Always check the name backwards.
She's Elizabeth Selwyn. So it had that real classic curse the witch and the witch will curse you. That's basically the story. And I love the fact that, as they get drawn in, it's all set under a pub, which is very Wicker Man sort of thing. It's set around the inn. It also reminded me of, but again, this will have been influenced by things like City of the Dead, Blood on Satan's Claw, which is a community of. But I thought the photography was amazing. It was almost like German expressionism in some places. It had these people in hoods, and it was beautifully shot.
It's almost like Sven Nykvist, Ingmar Bergman films of the similar time. It's that very kind of stark black and white and not a lot of greys in between.
Actually, maybe it is more like that than German expressionism. Yeah, it is. It's got that very sort of. You could expect Max von Sydow to appear
Yeah,
in a hood at any moment. But yeah,
yeah,
I was
and it
quite struck with how good it was
and
looked.
and in fact, I think in Twin Peaks: The Return, in our favourite episode, I forget what it's called.
Got a light.
Gotta like. Very similar use
Mm,
of photography. I think that very kind of stark black and white, and also very similar sort of
yeah,
the gas station and the yeah the
yeah, that's
smaller town
true.
American. Yeah, I just wondered
Yeah,
how
it
much
does
that
have
was an
a.
influence on David Lynch on that as well.
I imagine because I know David Lynch was, God rest his soul, sadly died between seasons, didn't he? It was very sad because he's one of our favorite film
Yeah,
directors slash people who ever lived, really. He was a
yeah.
great guy. I think he very much was influenced by everything that he saw and took in, and because he was an artist. So, yeah, I can see how he would have seen Amicus films and Hammer films and all those films, Bergman and
He would have grown up on that
Murnau and stuff
stuff.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, it's quite sad. I just had a moment where I've just got sad about David Lynch dying again. Damn it. Um,
Oh.
so yeah, it starts with this amazing "Burn the Witch, Burn the Witch." I love that it cuts to Christopher Lee, and Christopher Lee is going, and they chanted "Burn the witch, burn the witch, burn the witch," and then the guy goes, "Dig that groovy beat." Like, okay, there. Well, that places it in a certain time, doesn't it?
The Rosenberg Sabotsky, I think they're the film either side of this, as I say, with like these jazz kind of music kind of
Yes.
films as well. So that was a big
Yeah.
part of what they did.
We should say actually before we continue that we're not going to. So what we did in Hammerhead season one is that we did 18 movies because that's what it worked out. The BFI list was
Yeah.
18 movies, which was 1957 to 1974. It happened to be 18 movies, and sort of by coincidence, kind of by design, this season is also going to be 18 episodes because we've been through all of Amicus's output and including this film, City of the Dead, and we're omitting for reasons I will explain, the Doctor Who movies, the two Doctor Who movies, and a couple of the sort of things like you're saying that the music for you too,
Yeah.
Daddy-O type movies,
Yeah.
because they're not. I don't think of them as fitting in this genre really. And we're also getting rid of some of the UFO sci-fi ones because we want to focus on the horror ones because this is a horror
Yeah.
podcast after all. So we don't want to start doing going wandering off too far. So we've taken out about five or six in the list of which happens to total 18 movies.
Yeah. And
So
we
we've
also should say that we are also hoping to bring the Amicus story a bit more up to date as well as part of this
we
series.
are we've
But
got
more
some
on that later.
exciting developments occurring in in that regard. Yes. So yeah, we're back with City of the Dead, and we go back to the because this was in the 1700s, and we go back to the present, and we as you say, Christopher Lee's a professor, and he's going, oh yes, and this is what happened in this history, but what you don't realize is how linked everyone is to it.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, so it sort of rounds up the younger characters, Nan, and it sort of goes, well, they're interested in it, obviously, so they want to see what happened, and you feel like Christopher Lee's kind of gone, whatever you do, don't go and investigate it. In other words, do
Yes. He's
because ha ha ha.
reverse psychologying Nan and
Yes,
sends her off to this Whitewood, Massachusetts.
yes. Whitewood, Massachusetts. It's great because every time someone pulls up near Whitewood, there's this guy there who's always like, "Oh, you don't want to go there." Every time, and then increasingly, it almost becomes humorous at the end because there's three or four people arriving. And by the end, he's like, "Oh, there's more of you." It's like they don't like outsiders, and you're like, "Yeah." And when will people learn? But
Yeah,
so
that's a
he's sort
motif
of
that's come along, around in other films since.
it has, yeah. But he's privy to what's going on because when they say, "Oh, did you see a girl around here a couple of weeks ago?" It's like, "Yes, I did." He's not the usual sort of, "No, I've never seen her around these parts before," which you might have in a Hammer film. He's like, "Yeah, oh yeah, she came here a couple of weeks ago, but she disappeared." Yeah. So yeah, there's something dodgy going on. But then, yeah, when Nan checks into the hotel, and then you've got, you know, clearly the witch from the first scene is the landlady, and you just know, she's like, "Oh no, you can't go. This is what was left of the witch, but you can't go under the floorboards because there's just dirt down there now." And it's like, yeah, whoa, whatever.
And Jethro, her consort, who was
Jethro,
also
yes.
in the first scene, and he denies being involved with Selwyn, doesn't he? But
Now, Jethro, played by Valentine Dial, I instantly recognized his voice. Did you recognize his voice?
no, I didn't.
I'll give you a clue. He does the voice and only the voice, and it's uncredited, in another Amicus movie.
Oh, does he do the werewolf break?
Yes, well done.
He does the werewolf break in
Is the werewolf
The
break.
Beast Must Die. Excellent.
Yeah, in The Beast Must Die. Yeah, I thought, I know that voice just from that werewolf
Yeah.
break because it used to creep me out watching that at night. The Beast Must Die. Even though, as we come to discuss it later on in the season, it's not the scariest movie ever made, but it scared me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's got an
Valentine
atmosphere,
Dial
though,
as
hasn't it? It's
Jethro.
got...
It really does. It's got a lot going on in it. Beast Must Die. It's like three different movies, but we'll come to that in a few months' time.
Yes.
But yeah, Jethro
Jethro is always turning up in the heroine's car and then disappearing into thin air.
Yeah. I love it. Also, it reminded me of Psycho. Yes, once Nan's disappeared, you get the boyfriend and coming over and following up. It's almost like Arbogast coming to follow up on what happens. Obviously, in Psycho, Arbogast gets Norman Bates on the trail of the missing girl.
Yeah.
And it's similar here, and by the end, you've got people throwing themselves at each other, trying to destroy evil. But I love the bit when Nan gets lured down into the basement because it's like Evil Dead was possibly influenced by this because that it opens and you have these really creepy steps going down into the darkness. Blair Witch as well, probably. And he sort of wanders down there and you just know there's this bad stuff going on there, and you've spent the whole first half of the movie going, I know what's going on under that pub, and I don't really I want to see, but I don't want to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And Subotsky wrote the story. I think it wasn't quite feature length, so he got another guy, Baxt, I think, to write the full screenplay, and I think they introduced the boyfriend, the fiance character to kind of fill it out a bit. But yeah, I mean, it's. I think they had to defend to an extent that this wasn't ripped off from Psycho because it came out the same year, and obviously the female character, the main female characters in both films were killed off in the middle, and there's a denial that it was influenced by Psycho, even though I think the Psycho screenplay had been sort of floating around Hollywood for a while before, and he may have seen it, but.
Now, who wrote this one? It was
Subotsky.
Subotsky,
Yeah, I mean, he wrote the original story, and it was, I think it was George Baxt, I think, who did the screenplay.
George Baxt, that's it. And Psycho Robert Bloch.
That could be right.
Yes, it was Robert Bloch, and Robert Bloch works with Amicus at one point, so we can come back to that. Okay. So yeah, I wonder if they hired him because they loved Psycho, and it was like, yeah, let's get him. But yeah, so it's really this sort of story about a conspiracy and some hidden murders. Someone goes missing, and then the boyfriend comes to investigate, and then we find out what's happening, which is exactly what happens in Psycho as well.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why I thought this film was brilliant. But it's brilliant on its own merits as well. I think whether or not it was influenced by the Psycho screenplay, you don't know. They came out at the same time. They might not have known of each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a solid story. It's a solid screenplay.
Yeah.
And maybe, I make the mistake sometimes of going, oh, it must have been influential on all these films that have come since, but it can't possibly have been influential on all of them. But a lot of people seem to be aware of this movie.
Yeah.
And it did feel to me like a bit of a classic. I mean, it's got 6.7 on IMDb, which is actually high for an old movie that's, technically quite obscure, really, unless you know what you're watching.
And
that you're watching the first time, because
it's a budget film. I mean, it's half the budget that Hammer was spending on films around this time, and maybe that is partly due to the kind of color, the kind of black and white stock, rather than the color, and maybe the clever things that they did around, having the cameo really more than anything by Christopher Lee,
Yeah.
and then using actors and actresses, I guess, who were, they had some experience, but these weren't sort of leading names.
No. And I read somewhere that it cost 45 grand and it made 46 grand. So technically it was it made profit. But
Technically.
you know, I've made movies for more and less than that didn't make a profit. So I reckon if you can get a grand's worth of profit, hey, your quid's in, man. you know.
Yeah.
Um but it's a really cracking start. It's almost a shame it's not the first official Amicus movie because although the first official Amicus movie, which we'll discuss next episode, is also a corker. But
Yes.
this is very different from that because they hadn't done the portmanteau thing yet. Amicus becomes famous for doing this portmanteau thing, which is sort of 3, 4, 5 stories linked by things like Creepshow were influenced by. But this one is just its own thing, really, whether or not it
Yeah.
copied Psycho.
Well, I think it started off as a short story, so maybe it sort of could have been almost a portmanteau piece, but they sort of fleshed it out with other things. And I think the pacing of it is really good and it's entertaining
It is.
throughout. The Wikipedia page says that some of the financing was obtained with money from Nottingham Forest Football Club. So I'm be kind of
Oh yeah.
intrigued if anyone knows why.
That'd be interesting. Oh no, look, it cost. Oh no, here we go. It cost 45 grand or 47,341. There we go. It was considered a box office disappointment, although it did make a small profit.
Yeah.
So there you go. Heavy
And we're
metal
still
band
talking
Iron
about
Maiden
it 60
used
years
themes.
later, so
Well, that's it.
yeah.
That's it. Yeah. It's a simple story. It was originally going to be a TV series starring Boris Karloff. That's a fact I read
That's
earlier
it.
that I was going
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah.
And then Subotsky rewrote it. But yeah, I think you can see where the film could have ended. Could be like 45 minutes in, where Nan gets kidnapped, and then you find out what's happening. And oh, we've got a 50-minute movie. So the way to introduce a third act is to have the people who are looking for her, which is also good storytelling because you don't know what they're looking that they're going into danger because you've already seen someone get abducted.
And actually, it's kind of a callback then to the start of the film because a lot of the kind of characters change then because we're sort of in a different
Yeah.
time, in a different place.
Yeah, that's it. It actually reminded me of Fear Street. Fear Street is a really good, series of books, and also there's a trilogy on Netflix, the Fear Street trilogy, and it's set in 3 different time zones with some of the same characters, which I love. And they also did it in Ginger Snaps. They had the story about 2 sisters who were werewolves, and then the third film showed them 100 years ago, and it showed you the lore and the origin of the curse, which I really liked. So it's sort of had that vibe to it, that there's a conspiracy and this witch has sold her soul and that's why she's still here. But it's like, I love that it ties together 300 years of history very simply.
Interesting you should mention Ginger Snap. My friend Kurt Swinghammer did the soundtrack to Ginger Snaps 2.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh my god, that's amazing. Oh my god, we've got to interview him for something because those films are great.
Okay, so we should talk about the denouement of the film.
Yes. What happened at the end of the film, Marcus? I can't remember. It's been hours
Super
since I watched
memorable.
it. No, I do remember. It actually is a wonderful ending. It's so great that it all takes place in this misty graveyard, which is sort of, you sort of think something out of a Hammer film, but
Lots
it's
of
all black
dry
and
ice
white,
and stuff, yeah.
dry ice, and I love the fact that the way to the guy's dying. But they're like, pick up the massive cross and get them in the shadow of
No,
it.
you pick
And
up the
they'll-
massive cross.
Oh, you pick up the massive cross. And I love the fact that is almost like, obviously it's very religious. He has to carry a huge cross.
Yes.
And it's the sacrifice of him doing that causes them all to burst into flames and stuff because it's, obviously a religious thing. So I've not really seen it done like that before in a film.
No. Like to have to pick up such a massive cross.
Yeah,
seems
usually like
bit
with
much.
vampires, it's like bit of garlic, bit of silver,
Yeah.
cross, crucifix and stuff like that, and then, or throw holy water at them and stuff. But I mean, I only ever saw Buffy do something like this once.
Yeah, but it's pretty good. It's pretty cinematic.
Yeah.
Light and shade and all of that kind of stuff.
Very much so, yeah.
And the whole thing about, I mean, the big reveal of Christopher Lee's professor character not being all
Yeah.
he seems, that sort of comes a bit early for my liking. It would have been nice if they'd have held on to that
I know what you mean.
reveal a bit longer. But
Yeah, or made him super nice so that like when it
yeah,
comes up to the end, you're like, oh no, not him. Like, also reminded me of, and obviously I'm talking in reverse order because these will have been inspired by this, but it reminded me of Hot Fuzz,
oh
um,
yes,
where they're all gathered for the greater good. The
greater
greater
good.
good. Yeah, and they're all wearing hoods and they're all in on it and stuff. But yeah, so yeah, I would have loved to see Christopher Lee be a lovely benevolent character, and then at the end you're like, oh, not you as well, Christopher Lee.
Yeah, no, that would have been nice. That would have been kind of claustrophobic making, but yeah. But no, it was a good ending. And then you see that Selwyn has, I suppose, by virtue of the spell being overcome with
Yeah.
towards the end, you see that yeah, she sold her soul to Satan, but Satan's given it back by the end because her
Yeah, he's not
charred
having it back now.
remains are found.
The thing is, at the beginning, it was so the crucible, wasn't it? I mean, poor Selwyn. It's like, she's the curse. She's the like the witch. It reminded me of as well. She's like the root of all evil. Because that's obviously witch trials. That's the whole point. Is that it's like burn the heretic, burn the witch, burn the woman, and then our society will be back
Yeah.
to normal. And there was a sense at the beginning where you're like, she's a anti-hero because you're kind of like, she said, right, well, I'm going to come back and curse you all then because you're going to, you're doing this to me. So
And this is all a bit Laura Palmer as well, isn't it? I mean, this is Twin
yes,
Peaksy, that kind of narrative.
yeah, yeah, indeed. That sort of like, I will sacrifice the good
The
person, and the
homecoming
good
queen,
person,
and yeah,
yeah, will then become the sort of symbol of all your misery and sickness.
yeah,
So yeah, there was so much in there. You could probably, put this film on a piece of paper and draw lines out to all the other films that came after it.
ever.
Sure, I'm sure it was inspired by every film ever. The Avengers, you know,
Up.
Up, yeah, Birds of Prey, the Harley Quinn movie. All these
Yeah,
things were super. But yeah, I mean, if you go through the 70s and look at all these folk horrors, you could draw a line back to City of the Dead. Not to be confused with City of the Living Dead, which is the Lucio
yes,
Fulci movie, which I also must watch because I don't know if I've seen it, but I got the disc recently and I'm really keen to put that on. So yeah, we've that's 1 out of 18.
yeah. I enjoyed
Amicus
it.
films. I really enjoyed this film. It didn't even like when we started Hammer, we watched Curse of Frankenstein to start, and it was great because it had Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Even though you can't tell it was Christopher Lee really, but it was quite shaky in places.
Yeah,
I feel like this one, even though, well, let's call it the first Amicus movie unofficially. It's a very accomplished film. It's very slick. It's very tightly made, 77 minutes, which is like for some people is the ideal length of a film. And it's got lots going for it, and I think it's going to be one of my faves for years to come.
yeah. I'd certainly go back and watch it again. Grand. All right.
Definitely.
Well, we will next time remind us what we'll be covering.
Next episode, and we will try and do these more often than we did the first season, although we do get there in the end. The next film will be the very famous Dr. Terror's House of Horrors,
Oh yes.
starring
Now we're
Peter
back
Cushing.
to Peter Cushing. Yeah.
Yeah, and we always love to spend an afternoon in the company of Peter Cushing and a cucumber
Yes.
sandwich and a cup of tea. So if you enjoyed, then please rate us and give us some stars and stuff. And also, why not go back and check out the first season, which has 18 Hammer films waiting for you to discover, as we did.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back. We'll be back with more Amicus heads. No, we can't call it that. We'll confuse people. Next episode.
Okay. Go away and do your homework, and we'll see you there.
Bye bye.